We could use a little bit more rain, I think, to ensure that those colors are so pretty. But we're very glad that you're here today for our Brown Bag Lecture. Just a few kind of housekeeping announcements or kind of teasers for what's coming in the future. One housekeeping thing, or just a notice and a thank you to Knoxville Community Media. They continue to partner with us. We've been doing Zoom live streaming, which if anybody's been on a Zoom from a distance from an event, you know that it's not the ideal. But we appreciate those that join us every time and persevere and are, listen in to the less than ideal quality of a presentation. But with Knoxville Community Media here recording our programming, they edit it, they make sure that the power and the projection and the images get integrated, and then when we receive that, we're able to get it on YouTube so that it's a nice quality recording. We really appreciate that partnership. We were able to start that back after we all kind of shut down from COVID and went to everything technology. We realized that coming out of that, we need to find a nice balance. We need to be accessible because we have folks join us from all over the state and the region on our Zoom. So those of y'all that are joining us via Zoom, welcome to you as well. I wanted to say that my name is Lisa Oakley. I am Vice President of the East Tennessee Historical Society and Curator of Education. And I am here filling the extra large shoes of Dr. Warren Doctor, who is our CEO and President. And we have both had the honor, and today he is joined by our Community Engagement Manager, Kelly Weatherly Sinclair. Over in Cherokee, we have been involved with the Trail of Tears Association's conference that's being held there. It started on Monday through Wednesday. This will be the last day. And that is an association of state affiliates that are all working to protect that story in their home states. And then most of the executive board is headquartered and the executive director is headquartered in Oklahoma. But of course, all the Cherokee, all the different tribal units of that Cherokee Nation work together in that association, as well as many volunteers and community members. And so we have just been really privileged to be a part of that conference, and we look forward to continuing to work with that association, with the Museum of the Cherokee Indian, and with the National Park Service Trail of Tears Trails program that they have. So we've made some good connections, and we thank the Historical Society membership and audience and those of y'all that support us. It allows us to continue growing our connections, networking with folks to improve our interpretation here at the Historical Society and History Center. And we even may think about doing a fall tour. We've not done fall tours in many years, so maybe we can do a fall tour and share with you all some of the stories we've learned and go to some of the sites that we have learned about ourselves. So Warren wishes he could be here, but he is doing good work on behalf of the Historical Society in Cherokee. I wanted to announce a couple of our upcoming events, and if you want to take one of our flyers, we have October 14th is our next kind of standing lecture, and it will be at 7 p.m. on the real David Crockett, and that's with Scott Williams from West Tennessee. He's driving across, and we'll be talking about Davy Crockett, one of our our first native son, if you will, that becomes kind of an iconic figure as we look at the past. And he's going to talk about David Crockett, but in the context of his time and many of the people he knew in the times that he lived in. And so please join us. You can register on Eventbrite. If you can't be here, we will be Zooming that session as well, and you can register for that link on Eventbrite as well, or just walk in if you find that you're able to join us. It will be a big crowd, I think, so come early, find a seat, and we hope that you will join us. Also, I wanted to point out that we have a program coming up with Mari Nicely on Wednesday, November 2nd, that will actually piggyback on Nellie Kenyon's story today, especially with the Chattanooga story, that you'll see a little bit of film footage about some of the journalism that she did in Chattanooga on Jimmy Hoffa. I believe that's what she covered, the Hoffa trial. And so he's going to be talking about that Hoffa trial. So, come back and join us on November 2nd for our Brown Bag with Mari Nicely. So again, thank you for being here. I also want to introduce a new team member to the Historical Society. Kim Mays is helping in the back. He is our digital marketing and social media manager and is making sure that we're doing all the right things and in lots of different places to provide access to our programming through all these wonderful tools that we have now through technology. And we're also working on a new website that we hope to launch in sometime. It's not close enough yet to where we can actually pinpoint when that website will be launched, but I think everyone will enjoy that. So we have a lot to report. There's a lot going on, and but you all are here to hear our speaker, who is Tyler Boyd, who is the author of the book Nellie Kenyon, Trailblazing Tennessee Journalist, and that's what he'll be speaking on today. Born and raised in Athens, he earned his BA in History and MS in Education from the University of Tennessee. He's taught in Loudoun, Bradley, and McMinn counties. He is Programs Committee member at the McMinn County Living Heritage Museum and Vice President of the McMinn County Historical Society. His first book, Tennessee Statesman, Harry T. Burn, and maybe some of y'all came out to hear his program that he delivered on Harry T. Burn, his great-granduncle. So it's a family story, but a very important Tennessee story as well. Won the East Tennessee Historical Society's Award of Distinction. His third book, coming in 2023, is about a brutal political machine in Polk County that was violently overthrown 2 years after the Battle of Athens, which is a very important World War II era story for East Tennessee. So we're looking out for that. We really appreciate the work Tyler does and that he shares his research and shares his enthusiasm for local history and family history with us here at the East Tennessee Historical Society and History Center. So Tyler, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you all for coming out today. I'm sure the mountain air in Sevier County is a little cooler than it is here in downtown, but we'll get that cool air soon. But thanks for coming out today on the first day of fall. And it's great to be back here giving my second presentation at the East Tennessee History Center, and I'm a proud member of the Historical Society here. And Nellie Kenyon has connections all over this state, mostly the Chattanooga and Nashville area, but I'll talk about some stories related to this area as well, and to give you a preview on a future talk, like Lisa said, about the Jimmy Hoffa trials. Well, this book was published by Walden House Publishers, a very, very good small press in Signal Mountain in the Chattanooga area, and it really fit because Nellie was raised in the Chattanooga area and spent the first half of her career there. And I highly recommend working with this press if you have any local history or memoir, family history, community history, maybe even like a self-help book. They have books about nature, anything like that. So Karen Stone at Walden House Publishers, I thank her for a great job with that book. Nellie Kenyon, believe it or not, is actually mentioned in my first book about Harry T. Burn. And it's very rare that I, or really any author of a nonfiction, would quote a journalist unless it's a big name, like Cronkite or Walters, in your text, mostly because you need to save on words because they don't like people that are wordy like me. But I quoted her, and there's a reason why, and you'll find out. But you'll see here that I tried to get a template that looked like a old yellow newspaper that you've had sitting around the house for a few years. This looks more like parchment, but hey, it's close enough. So I wrote these make-up headlines here. Jurors selected for Scopes trial. Local journalist helps catch bank robber. That's bland, but sometimes that's how it's got to be. You don't have a lot of space on the front page of a paper. And an exciting one, Hoffa survives assassination attempt. So you can see three very different, diverse stories from her career that span, in this case, almost 40 years. And as you'll also see, for some reason, the crooks and the controversy always found her for some reason. But that's fine because she did a great job covering them. But I found this quote from Nellie after her retirement. She was a lot more opinionated then, and I think that's a good thing, especially since she was retired and no longer working in that field. My objective was always to get the story, hewing to the who, what, where, and when. I think you should stick to the simple rules. And, why is important too, but sometimes that would require a lot of assumptions and conjecture, and she didn't get in the middle of any of that kind of stuff, thankfully. Well, you may be able to see here, it's a pretty good picture, but this is from her scrapbook and her papers, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't organized like the papers of Harry T. Byrne here, or the papers of Estes Kefauver at the Modern Political Archives. But I'm really glad she donated her papers to the UT Library Special Collections at the Hodges Library. And she included her telegrams, letters, all correspondences, clippings, magazines, and autographed photos of all sorts of people from her career. And she put these on display when she gave a seminar at the Humanities Building, which you'll recognize in some pictures, in 1974. I found out about her papers because when I first looked at a book about the Scopes trial, after my first book was published, I was perusing it and I noticed that she's in a picture and she's the only woman there in a gaggle of reporters in Dayton. And it mentioned some more things and it intrigued me. I went home and I looked her up and I found out that she had donated some papers to UT, and I went there to research and I realized that another life story needed to be told. And there were a lot of great things we could learn from her. We could take inspiration from her in a lot of ways. It may be kind of hard to tell, but you can see autographed photos of Presidents Harding, Hoover, Nixon, and a magazine featuring Clarence Darrow, William Jennings Bryan, autographed photo of John T. Scopes. I think I see JFK there. A magazine in the top right corner where she was profiled, and many, many more. So, how did she end up in my first book? Well, the person on the right here is my great-great-grandmother, Fab Ensminger Byrne, as you all probably know, is Harry T. Byrne's mother. She was dubbed the mother who saved suffrage. After Harry's deciding vote to ratify the 19th Amendment, he became an overnight celebrity. Well, his mother was also highly sought after for interviews. People want to know about her too. What's her story? Why did she write him? What did she say? Is the letter real? Of course it's real. All sorts of things. What's her background, So I'm not going to count the local papers, and I don't really even have to because they're not preserved. So great job, local paper. But it happens, you have fires and all that. But of the big city papers, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Nashville, Nellie got the very first interview with Fab Byrne. So that vote in the legislature in Nashville was on Wednesday, August 18th, mid-morning. So there's stories about the vote in the evening edition of the Chattanooga News, and I believe the Tennessean. And then Thursday morning, it was ran in the Chattanooga Daily Times and the Nashville Banner. I can't remember which one was a morning here in Knoxville. But that Thursday, Nellie probably took a train, but maybe her Model T, to Nyota, about an hour from Chattanooga, to interview the mother who saved suffrage. And because of her work on that article, I found out more about my ancestor. So Nellie right here, probably in her 20s, I think this is in Dayton. She's barely 5 feet tall, and Fab Byrne is about 5'8", so imagine she's just towering over her. But they both really get along well. They're both proud Southerners, and they're both members of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I'm sure they had a lot to talk about. Now this is the clipping. We're all spoiled today on newspapers.com. All the big papers are on there now. We can do Control-F search. But I'm glad Nellie kept every article she did in her scrapbook, including this one. She gleaned information about my great-great-grandmother and her past and Harry's childhood that I never knew because I did not ask my grandfather Byrne, who died in 2004, more about his grandmother, who died in 1945. He actually missed her funeral because he was still fighting in the Pacific. So when I started researching my Harry T. Byrne book in 2017, I spoke to a few nonagenarians who knew Miss Feb, but they were little kids, when they knew her. So thanks to Nellie's article, I found out a whole lot more about her and about Harry's early life. And I'm going to zoom in on a few pictures here. This is a picture that Nellie took. Of course, this reran in multiple papers, and you can see the hedge bushes there. And Nellie was a flatterer, at least in this case. She said that this estate, which is called Hathburn, H-A for Harry, T-H for Thomas, and Burn, although it didn't have the name at the time, but now everyone in town knows it as Halfburn. Reminds one of Mount Vernon, the home of the father of his country, George Washington. Now, won't quite go that far, but before I show you the next picture, remember the suffrage setting is in the summertime. It's in August of 1920. You know, the windows at the old stone state capitol building are open, and they're all dressed really nice in ties and, you know, sweating like crazy. So the setting of this picture doesn't quite capture the suffrage story, but it does capture how beautiful this estate was. Now, this is winter. Make a great Christmas card, and Harry Jr. did send out a lot of Christmas cards, which we all miss. But this is before a lot of overgrowth, and the current owner is not exactly into the whole landscape architecture kind of thing. But this is what it looked like, minus the snow, when Feb hosted Nellie King for an interview. And that was one of the better ones, too, because she got a lot of visitors, including people trying to come take some of Harry's baby clothes for souvenirs. That's kind of creepy. And also the wife of a former governor of Louisiana showed up, Mrs. Ruffin G. Pleasant, that's a good southern name, you know, demanding that Feb retract her letter, and she said no. But with Nellie, she had a great experience. So this is Nellie's first big get in her career as a journalist, having started around the time of World War I, just out of high school. She was born in 1898. She got into it because of her mother. She said, "My mother's my greatest teacher. I wish I'd inherited her mind." Her mother was Rosalie Terry Martin, later married David Palmer Kenyon. She was from North Georgia, but spent some time growing up in Greenville at Guthrie Place. I never heard of that before, but maybe some of the Greene County folks know where that is. I'm looking at you, Tim Massey, if you're watching. The Chattanooga News started in this building here in downtown Chattanooga in the late 19th century. Rosa was the society editor, or also known as the women's page, and the mindset at that time was, you know, the men did the real reporting, and the women would do what happened at the Garden Club meeting, what happened at the DAR meeting or the UDC meeting, who's getting engaged, who gets what happened at the wedding, things like that. And Nellie was the youngest of 6 kids, and her mother had her when she was about 40, so whenever Nellie's really getting into the business, her mom starts to have health problems, and whenever she misses work, Nellie would fill in for her. And she did a great job on the society page. She hated it. She wanted to do all sorts of other things. She did everything from the bottom rung of an organization, you know, having to work extra hard to prove herself and her abilities. And by 1918 or 17, she's doing stories on women working World War I because husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers are out fighting the war. And then she gets to interview Feb Burn. And her mother retires by this time. And Nellie's going to work her way up to doing the real news. So the next building the Chattanooga News is in is, I couldn't tell you exactly where it is. If you're familiar with downtown Chattanooga, this building is on the same square as Chattanooga City Hall. So if you're standing outside Chattanooga City Hall and you look around, you'll see this building somewhere there. That's all I can tell you. But it's been remodeled a lot, I'm sure, on the front. And I just love how it says news out there. It's just so simple, no fancy names like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution or the Richmond Times-Dispatch or whatever. You know, just Chattanooga News. And I got more to say on that later. So she starts out there full-time. She does a lot of great stories. She gets to interview then-candidate, future President Warren G. Harding, who later on offered her a job at the Marion Star, the newspaper that he used to run. And he may have just been trying to flatter, I don't know, but still, they got along really well. And she covered a Ku Klux Klan rally in Rossville, Georgia, just across the state line, when the Klan had its sort of second iteration, you know, and thankfully it fizzled out a few years later. And that's another one of those stories where she proved the kind of work she could do to her editor and publisher, George Fort Milton. Well, then we get to the Scopes trial. Now, you'll see press pass number 1 here. Judge McKenzie. Now, this is not the Scopes trial judge. Judge McKenzie was the equivalent of the county mayor we have today. I don't know who it is now. It used to be Burchett. But the judge who did the Scopes trial was a criminal court judge named Ralston. And, of course, they had their circuit they traveled. But at this time, the local county judge had to sign off on all the press passes, and she got number one because she got there in May, and the trial was in July. This is the one time I'm glad she got treated differently because she's a woman, because of the assignments they gave her, being, on the bottom of the totem pole, which partly was because she's fairly new, but also obviously because of her gender. I'm glad that she got to do this work because it needed to be done, and it brings in so much more information that needs to be known and is so overlooked about the Scopes monkey trial. So who are the two people that come to mind when you think about the Scopes trial? I'm hearing William Jennings Bryan, and then there's another attorney, Clarence Darrow, yes. So they're nationally known figures, William Jennings Bryan was Secretary of State, made a few runs for president. Clarence Darrow was one of the most famous defense attorneys in the country. They're important. I don't want to underemphasize them, but there's so much more that happened in this trial. She's sent there, and let me make sure I've got, okay, I do, all right, make sure I have the right pictures. She's sent there in May to cover the lead up to the trial because, Scopes is indicted or arrested in May. She gets there and she talks to Scopes. She talks to his father, who I had no idea until I did this research, is an immigrant from England. She talked to all sorts of local people there getting ready to expecting a Woodstock type of crowd. And they have street vendors selling these, stupid monkey-related toys, and had a little chimpanzee in a suit playing a piano, and all the food trucks of the day, and all getting ready for the big event, and they ended up being disappointed because it wasn't quite as big as they would have liked. I think they oversupplied themselves. She spoke to, believe it or not, a great grandnephew of Charles Darwin, who literally was a business owner in Dayton. I kid you not. The world's just too small. And he's like, yeah, I'm not going to the trial. I got too much work to do. Okay. Well, so she does a lot of the lead up, and there's a lot more to it to that as well. But one thing she does, she gets there, and this courthouse at the time is in 1890. It's about 35 years old. It's not that old, but hadn't really had a good cleaning in a while. The windows and the floors are filthy, and she talks to the county judge and convinces him to get that place cleaned up for the trial. And if you haven't been to the Ray County Courthouse in Dayton, they have a new or newly remodeled multi-million-dollar Scopes Museum, which is absolutely fantastic. The only flaw is that it's only open during, like 9 to 4 weekdays. Maybe one day they can expand those hours, but I highly recommend going there. It's really nice. Also, Nellie's the one who, again, I don't exaggerate, is the one who did the investigative reporting that this whole thing was cooked up literally in Effie Robinson's drugstore. Now, we know a lot about that here because we're in Tennessee, we're in East Tennessee. Just like we know a lot about the East Tennessee stories, we know more about the Harry T. Burns story and the bomb in Oak Ridge and about our presidents, from over here, Andrew Johnson, things like that. But people from all over the country, they think, oh yeah, that guy, he was, that they passed this law that banned teaching evolution in public schools, and he was teaching it, and they came in and arrested him, and he got the ACLU to help him out, poor fella. And of course I say this, I'm just playing the role of the sentiment there, and it's not what happened at all. So before the trial in June, she talks around town, and she figures out how it really happened. The man on the left in the glasses sitting down is George Rapplier, a local businessman who wanted to bring publicity to Dayton. He's the manager of a coal company, and it's not doing well despite the fact that it's a roaring 20s. The man in the middle is without a tie on, sitting down, is Walter White, not that Walter White. Sorry, I didn't watch that show, but he was the superintendent of Ray County Schools, and also he's one of those state legislators that would not go away till he died. He was in office forever. And then on the right, you have the school board chairman and the pharmacist owner, F.E. Robinson. They're called the drugstore conspirators. She talks to all of them and figures out what really happened. They knew that once the law passed, there was going to be a test case, and it was going to have a lot of media attention. And if I recall correctly, there was somebody in Chattanooga trying to make that happen. But it was taking a while. I mean, imagine all the schools they could have chosen from down there. Well, in Dayton, these guys got together and said, hey, let's get a teacher. Let's go talk to find someone who's willing to say they taught evolution, and we'll have him arrested, which is what they did. They got a deputy to actually put the cuffs on him and charge him. And they sat down there with him and wrote a telegram to the ACLU on a napkin. And the ACLU bought this hook, line, and sinker because they were desperate to come here and defend this man against this law and, of course, paint a not-so-flattering picture of the people of Ray County. And she's the one who figured out this is how the Scopes trial actually happened. And after the trial, the New Yorker lamented the fact that her story was sort of going to be underemphasized, because she wasn't getting the attention she deserved compared to a lot of the other reporters, including H.L. Mencken, reporter for the Baltimore Sun, who did not mince words and was not very kind to the people of Ray County. Well, also about the Scopes trial, too. One more thing I wanted to say. She wasn't in the courtroom very much, maybe not at all, because you had the reporters in there. And, that was considered the men's job, but that mindset back then. And you've got the paper's main guy, John P. Fort, doing some stuff. And you've got her editor, George Fort Milton, Jr., the stepson of the suffragist Abby Crawford Milton. He took over when his dad died. He was doing editorials. And, this is back when you had John P. Fort and everyone else doing straight news, hard news, and then you had the editorial, saying this is the paper's opinion. Today, I'm not sure that's what would go down, but Nellie was not doing that. And I'm glad. She got to do all the other great stories there about the community and learn about all those other interesting characters. And we still have a transcription of what was said in the trial. I mean, you have to keep that as a court reporter there for that reason. So I'm glad she did what she did at the Scopes trial, and she's really overlooked there. The other major story from the first half of her career in Chattanooga was the bank robbery. This was in 1931, and I won't spoil it because it's probably my favorite chapter in the first half of the book. But if you're familiar with Chattanooga, when you come out of the tunnel under Missionary Ridge and you're going down, you're approaching the Macaulay campus, you'll come to Macaulay Avenue and Highland Park Avenue. There's a bank there now. It's a gray building. It might be stucco, and it has Alexander Hamilton's profile carved into the stone there as a tribute to the bank's heritage. Now it's a different building. This was torn down and rebuilt. But at the time, the Highland Park branch of the Hamilton National Bank, once a big locally owned bank, later bought out by First Tennessee probably 40 years ago, they were robbed, and she went to cover the robbery. But she got a lucky break, but still, through her outstanding reporting and detective skills, she helped catch this bank robber. And it really was one of the times when she said later on in retirement, she said reporters shouldn't make the news. Now she meant that as a double entendre. You're not supposed to make it up, and you're not supposed to be in the news yourself. But in this case she was, and that was okay because it wasn't really her intention. She happened to come across evidence and did some investigation, and she made the news. She won an award from Illustrated Detective Magazine. They had a contest every year for the best reporter detective story. Non-fiction, narrative non-fiction. I don't know who titled this. I think it fits well to kind of fit the mindset of the time. The girl reporter gets her man. And let's see. Yeah, $1,000 reward. There was a reward offered by the bank president. And she should have got more of that money, but she didn't because the person who gave her information unknowingly about how to find the robber wanted some of the money. And the two policemen who helped arrest the guy wanted the money too. Nothing against the police, but they're doing their job. The reward says information leading to the arrest of the robber. And one of the attorneys she used in that civil case, which was not fair, was the firm of Sizer, Chambliss, and Kefauver in Chattanooga before ISIS got into politics. Well, she wins the award, wins the $1,000, gets to go to New York, all expenses paid. She gets to meet the First Lady of New York, soon to be First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt. And they really hit it all. So she could get along with Southern women and Northern women. So it's very impressive, especially at this time. Still kind of sectional, in the way the politics worked there. And Franklin Roosevelt came here. Well, he came to the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure what county he was in. Maybe Sevier or something. But she covered that when he came here to not dedicate. That was a little later. But when he came to actually tour the Great Smokies before it was officially turned into a national park, when the Tennessee legislature was still trying to get the land purchased, because North Carolina had already done that. Tennessee needed to buy their part of it and get it officially turned over to the Department of the Interior. She covered that trip in 1936, close to Knoxville. And she did meet him one time when Speaker Bankhead, apparently his daughter was a movie star, I had no idea, Tallulah Bankhead. Speaker of the House Bankhead from Alabama, he passed away in 1940. And she got to ride in a train from Chattanooga to Alabama for the funeral, and President Roosevelt was with her, and unfortunately it was off the record. And I have no record of what they talked about. There's not even an article about it, but I know that it happened because she talks about it. So that's the second president she met. Well, her mother passes away in 1939. Her dad passed away around the time of the Scopes trial. Never married, never had kids. She has, I think, one sibling living around there, maybe two. And I don't think she liked the new ownership there. The Chattanooga Free Press was started by a man named Roy McDonald. It was all paid for through ads at first. It was free. And then he started charging subscriptions because he got to be a pretty formidable competitor to the Chattanooga Daily Times and the Chattanooga News. And the Chattanooga News hit hard times financially, and Milton, unfortunately, had to sell. And Roy McDonald is worried that Milton would try to start another paper with the same name. So he co-opted the name and changed his paper to the Chattanooga News Free Press. And if you've ever seen the little book, The Elements of Style, by Strunk and White, who a lot of English students may use in college, I read that when I was getting ready to write my first book to kind of sharpen my writing skills a little bit. And I remember, I'll never forget it, he said, he wrote this book like, the 40s or 50s. A good example of a misuse of a hyphen is a Chattanooga News Free Press in Tennessee, because it sounds like the paper is devoid of news. So she leaves in late 1940, or after she meets President Roosevelt, and she goes to work for what she called the best big city newspaper in America. Now, Nashville, pretty dang big now, it's beating out Vegas for bachelorette parties, but back then, I'd say Nashville's still mid-size, but to her, it's big, She starts there in late 1940. She's 42 years old, and the second half of her career is nothing short of amazing, just like the first half. She picked up right where she left off. She had to start out doing some local government stuff, didn't quite get to where she should have been, but it didn't take too long. She covers local government. She interviews some Japanese Americans in the draft in 1941 and 42 who registered to fight for this country, and a 15-year-old kid who lied about his age to fight in World War II. And then she did some work on Tennessee's temporary poll tax repeal, which, thanks to our friend in Polk County, Birch Biggs, who was a friend of Paul Cantrell in McMinn County, famous for the Battle of Athens, the poll tax was repealed, and then Mr. Biggs filed a lawsuit, and the repeal got overturned, and we had to pay a poll tax for another 10 years. So she covered that, and how it happened in Nashville, because the local government sort of took cover from that lawsuit, and it was because of the whole, you have a county and then a state poll tax, and it's just a mess. And then a chapter I recommend reading in the daytime, if you're like me and you get, at night, I like to go to bed in a good mood. If I have bad news to tell people, I'll wait till the morning unless it's just really pressing, but I don't read this one at night. Have you ever heard of the Georgetown baby adoption scandal in Memphis? There's been a couple of books about it. Memoirs from people who are adults now who were babies at the time. There's been, I think, a historical fiction novel about it, and there's been some made-for-TV movies. Well, I'll try to make this quick, but she had a racket. She ran the Tennessee Children's Home Society in Memphis, which had one foot in the private sector, one foot in the government sector, which is never good. It doesn't need to be any blurred lines. And she wasn't really receiving a lot of oversight like she should have received from Nashville. And she had all sorts of dirty tricks to get rich off of adoptions. And she did it for over 20 years. And when Nellie did not bust the story open. Miss Tan, Georgia Tan, died a few days after the story broke of cancer, and I wish she'd lived for the trial, but she would deserve to be convicted. But Nellie was sent there to do investigative reporting. And she did a 6-part series, that's probably at least 5,000 words, if I had to guess, going to Memphis and North Mississippi and East Arkansas and Southeast Missouri, finding all sorts of horrific things about this. And she later said she's most proud of this work, even more so than Scopes and Jimmy Hoffa, because it led to stricter adoption laws in Tennessee. I mean, she was adopting these babies to movie stars in California like William Powell and June Allison and Joan Crawford. And just give you one example of the tricks, instead of adopting to the families here in Tennessee or that region, she would fly out, she'd send some assistants out, and she'd fly 5 babies on one flight to California. So it's a round trip to California. Well, she charges them as if it's 5 separate flights and pockets the rest. Now, that's just the not-so-nightmarish stuff. And one of the kids, one of the last ones adopted by Georgia Tan, is the wrestler, the nature boy, Ric Flair, and the bleached blonde hair, which I loved as a kid when I was a dumb kid in 1998. But he was one of them. And then there's also a great story about Governor Frank Clement, namesake of Clement Hall over there on the UT campus, where I had a friend who lived there for a while. Frank Clement was a very colorful governor, sort of had a mixed legacy. He did an outstanding job in the Clinton 12 crisis compared to most Southern governors who just did not enforce desegregation at all. And he had no scandal to hide, but she did find out something about him. He had a tape recorder hidden under his desk. This is 20 years before Watergate. And the tape recorder is like the size of a milk crate and probably records 1 hour, and it's controlled with a foot pedal. And she's the one who broke the story. And when you see how she did it and his reaction, it was pretty amusing. And then we get to perhaps our crowning achievement in the second half, if not overall, is the trials of Jimmy Hoffa. Now, I'll ask this question because at this time, I guess 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I did not know this. Who knew that Jimmy Hoffa's trials and conviction was here in Tennessee? Yeah, one person, maybe 2. That's it. I mean, I'm not surprised. I didn't know. You hear about Hoffa, arguably the most famous missing person in modern U.S. history. I know you have Amelia Earhart. She's up there, but that wasn't a crime. Probably just an accident. So Hoffa was a charmer. Don't let this picture fool you. Nellie was very fair and impartial to everyone. That's one of the reasons I liked her. She didn't play favorites or give her friends softball questions or give her she didn't give gotcha questions to people she didn't like. But Hoffa was the kind of person who could really charm the room, and in the back, the guy's a snake. And he was the most powerful, second most powerful person in the country in the late 50s and early 60s after the U.S. president. Because if the Teamsters, all the truck drivers in America, if he wanted them to stop working, snap his finger, the whole country's paralyzed. I mean, you think London's bad when the tube goes on strike for a few days. That's nothing compared to what would happen if this man had them strike. So there were times when he was so frustrated with the press it's a railroad job. No, we're just reporting the facts that you're full of crap. But he liked Nellie. And Nellie, he called her the most persistent woman he's ever known. And the one time he wanted to talk only to her that day, he was so frustrated. So for what that's worth, he really admired Nellie Kenyon. And they got along for the cameras. She said, I never ever called him Jimmy Dear. He called me Nellie Dear, but I got to brush that off back in those days. But she was fair to him, and she covered it impartially. And I read every article she wrote about his trials. One of them was 6 weeks, and a lot was very dry, but had to be done. So the first trial is in Nashville. I'll try to make this interesting. Again, some of the stuff's kind of dry, but Hoffa and a friend incorporate a trucking company in their wives' names in Tennessee to make it off the radar from where he is in Detroit, Michigan. And there's only one problem with that. When you're the executive of a union, you can't own stock in a major trucking company. That's against federal law, but of course rules don't apply to him. So it's one of those things where the cover-up's worse than the crime, and if he had just taken the hit, he would have been out of jail and back to his usual, shenanigans. But he fought it, and there was a mistrial over a hung jury. But there should have, not should have been. He said there should have been a mistrial because of this, and I'll show you. Has anyone here seen the movie, make sure it's, Chrome. The movie The Irishman with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro on Netflix? Okay. That movie, 3.5 hours long. If you haven't seen it on Netflix, be prepared for an intermission. You're going to need it. It's very good. Martin Scorsese didn't have to edit it down for theaters. The book, The Irishman, is based on Frank Sheeran, who was an associate of Hoffa for many years. He was Irish. And of course, he didn't really, it's kind of a clash with the whole Italian, culture with the mafia. But they accepted him, and he was very loyal. Most of the movie's accurate. And thanks to Maury Nassi's book and the articles that I read, he covered this. Scorsese and the screenwriter really portrayed this very accurately in the movie, and they had to gloss over some things like the Chattanooga trials, maybe 10 seconds on screen, in a montage. But this scene's very accurate. The only thing about it is he didn't kill Hoffa. He got Charles Brandt to write the book on his deathbed because he wanted his family to have some money. He died about 20 years ago. And the book's called I Hear You Paint Houses, because when you shoot someone and the blood splatters on the wall, you're painting a house. And so the guy's full of crap on killing Hoffa. And no one may never know who did it, but there's a former mafia member named Michael Franzese who has a YouTube channel. He left the mafia and survived. He became a born-again Christian, and he gives motivational speeches all over the country discouraging people from getting involved in crime. Not just joining the mafia, but and being involved in crime, making bad decisions and things like that. And he says the killer is still alive and he's in prison for a different reason. And I guess the kids need closure one day, I don't know. But they did an outstanding job of getting rid of the body and getting rid of the evidence. I'll give them that. But I'll get ahead of myself. I'll get to more of that in a minute. But this scene right here is at the first trial in Nashville. Nellie witnessed this, and I'll try to pause it to where you can see Nellie, because Martin Scorsese did his homework, and she makes a cameo here. The guy who tried to kill him was very similar to, let's go to current slide here, he's very similar to the person who tried to kill President Garfield, and I forget his name, and of course Hinckley tried to kill President Reagan. They're either evil or they're disabled and can't help it. But he said there were voices in his head telling him to kill Jimmy Hoffa. Now, I wasn't a Hoffa fan, but you still can't do that. And thankfully, he didn't pump up that pellet BB gun. He didn't air it up, or maybe it ran out of CO2, I don't know. But you can see this bounced off Al Pacino's shoulder in that scene, and Hoffa just welled on the guy. And Nellie reported on that. And her reporting on Hoffa was so accurate that she received death threats, probably from some Teamsters members. And one of her, or actually her boss, but really a colleague, she was, wanted to be his mother, but they got along really well. John Siegenthaler, he probably learned as much from her as she did from him, even though he was her boss, being the publisher and editor there. And they got along really well. And the next day, this is the only time he ever sort of, I guess, treated her in like a you need help kind of way. She was getting on in years. She was in her 60s, and she's a little old lady. He said, I'll escort you to the courthouse tomorrow because you got those threats. And she wasn't worried. And then they go to Chattanooga, and he's finally convicted. And I recommend reading Maury Nassi's book, Hoffa in Tennessee, published by UT Press, and coming to his lecture later on this year. It's very, very good. Her reporting on Hoffa really should have won her more accolades than it did. She got nominated for a Headliner Award. Didn't get a Pulitzer nomination. She should have never got one. It's unfathomable to me. But she retired a few years later. She retires in 1970, the same year John T. Scopes dies. And then, 1974, you have a classroom. I know this is Humanities Building at UT. Definitely the Humanities Building. I recognize it anywhere. I had many classes there. She gives a seminar to the journalism students there, with their long hair and beards. And I think I may have some, okay, I'll get to that in a second. So this is when she brings the personal papers and the pictures I showed you at the display at the beginning. And she gives these people a lot of really good advice, and I really hope they listen to her. Because like I said, she got a little bit more opinionated. And I had no idea. I couldn't pin down anything any belief she had. You know, she said when we were covering federal trials, I could sit there and think the guy's guilty of sin, but I can't type that. I'm typing, you know, what reporting the facts. And right after she retired, she worked for the John J. Hooker Jr. campaign for governor. And he lost at a time of change in the state because he was the first Democrat to lose a governor's race in 50 years since 1920, the 19th Amendment ratification. So, and then in 1974, so she gives a seminar and she says, I think it's bad to become involved. You got to be free to report on any aspects. So taking a stand against activism, which is fine, but you can't mix activism with journalism. The best journalists stick to the facts. The greatest trouble with journalists today is a lack of accuracy. They're too lazy to take notes and don't bother to get facts. Now, this is 50 years ago. I think she talked about the tape recorders, you know, the things are the size of a brick that probably record a half hour, you know. She says it's okay to use those, but don't use them as a crutch. Use them in case you don't want to misquote someone. Maybe you missed something and you were writing shorthand. She says you have to eat, live, and breathe this. You have to sometimes skip lunch, or you have to eat your lunch on the go. Anyone can be a lead or give you a story. You have to be persistent. She learned how to read upside down. She had some people who were so scared of her they didn't want to talk to her. They would actually stay in their office all day until business hours are closed and she had to leave the building for them to close up. And there's a great story that Keel Hunt, one of the few people I spoke to who knew her, he's an author and used to work for Senator Alexander, he has a good story about her. But now this is just my opinion, but I think if she were around today, I think she would stick to newspapers. They have their flaws, you know, they're being bought up by conglomerates and they don't hire locals. And you can look at articles now, it's not the way it was even when I was a kid, and I'm not that old. And you got a lot of ads in there, and you got the internet, and the Chattanooga Times Free Press is down to one paper a week printed, which is a Sunday, and they do the rest of it's digital, e-edition, and they gave their subscribers they're going to hate me for this, they gave their subscribers iPads, but then there was like a hidden surcharge, you know, they didn't tell people about. I understand they're trying to keep up with the digital world, but still, I mean, Nellie would just hate not having a paper in her hand. She read it every day till she died. And she wouldn't get on any social media for news. She wouldn't watch any cable news because you know what you're going to get watching whatever channel. It's just going to be preaching to the choir. And she was really old school, and I think that we need more people like her today. She set such a great example in so many ways, and a lot of people really looked up to her. But one thing, she was not really one of the people who was ready to take a mentor under her wing. Later on, she was, like I said, really busy and just, you know, married to the job, and there were some people like Keel Hunt who thought, oh, maybe we should take him under our wing. No. He's like, she was pretty curt, and one time he misspelled Greenville, Tennessee, and she chewed him out in front of the whole newsroom, and he must have felt this big, you know, after that. So, yeah, not really a mentor in the traditional sense. All you have to do is watch her. That's what he said. Just watch her. Nellie was there for the watching, and you'll learn, you know. So, but at that point, she had the right to be, you know, the way she was, and I understand that. So, she had high expectations for everybody there. So that's 74, her seminar. 1975, Jimmy Hoffa disappears. And then 1982, she passes away in Nashville at the age of 83. She dies on a Saturday in February. And she's smart because her obituary is in the Sunday paper the next day. It's on the front page of the Tennessean. It's continued on 2 different pages. It's probably about 2,000 words, maybe 1,500. I may exaggerate there, but longer than most. You know, in my whole life, I can remember very few people who got an obituary that long in the DPA in Athens. You know, it takes quite a person to be able to pull that off, and that's February. Fast forward to later on that fall, Jimmy Hoffa's been missing for over 7 years. And he is declared dead in absentia by a judge in Michigan. The missing person, missing for 7 years, is now legally dead. He's gone, she's gone, Scopes is gone, all the presidents she met is gone, and we're in the new era now. So I want to tell her story not just because she did outstanding work, not just because she was a great role model for objectivity and impartiality in journalism. I also wanted to show what she did for us historians and genealogists and people who have an interest in these greatest episodes in our state and national history. She's writing these accurate stories, first-hand accounts, primary sources in her articles, and we use them when we research these episodes. When we research about suffrage like I did, when people research about maybe Warren Harding or President Roosevelt and their interactions in Tennessee, and about the Scopes trial, instead of another book about Darrow and Brian and their whole, did God mean 24-hour days when he meant days? Did you believe they were dinosaurs? Oh, Bishop Darrow, you're just a bigot, you hate Christians. We've heard enough of that. There's so much more to the Scopes trial, and thanks to her first-hand accounts, we have that, and then we know more about the Georgia Tan baby adoption scandal, and then people were able to learn how to make better laws to protect the kids who were adopted. And we learned more about Jimmy Hoffa and the history of crime and unions and things like that. And for that, I'm thankful that she just provides a great resource for historians to use. And I just love telling her story. Obviously, I like biographies. And I want to make this a happy one because the next one's going to be pretty rough and not so happy. But I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you like Miss Nellie. I think you will. And if you want me to sign a book for it, I'd be glad to. And if you have any questions at all about Miss Nellie or any comments, I'll be glad to take them. So thank you. Yes.
Did you, I can't remember what was her education and how did she become a journalist?
She didn't go to college in the traditional sense. She graduated from Chattanooga Central High School around the time World War I started, and her mother really got her into it, taught her a whole lot. And she had great mentors at the Chattanooga News, including a man named Charles Poe and her editors, George Fort Milton Sr. and Jr., who treated her much better than most editors did women back in those days. And Siegenthaler, too, she's lucky to have those guys. She worked for other people back then. I imagine she worked for the J.K. Simmons, the guy on the State Farm commercials. Imagine him in the Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. He's a jerk, and he runs that tabloid, Spider-Man's enemy. That's how most of those editors were back then. I'm glad she didn't work for a jerk like that. But she did take some classes. She took some night classes at Chattanooga about how to be a better writer and things like that. And before Vanderbilt took it over, she took some classes at Peabody College in Nashville about writing and the newspaper business and things like that. So she was always, trying to improve herself, but didn't have a college degree in the traditional sense. Yes?
Did she mentor any other young women reporters?
Not in the sense of like she took a protege under her wing, but June Adamson, she was a reporter. I think she's deceased now. Not too long ago she passed away, but she worked, I think, around here. She lived in Oak Ridge, I want to say. She went back to school in her middle age and got a PhD at UT. That's around 1970, something like that. And she profiled 6 women. The thesis is called Selected Tennessee, Selected Women in Tennessee Newspaper Journalism. And she profiled Zella Armstrong, who was a famous publisher of I think it was called The Lookout back in Chattanooga. She was like the son of or daughter of a Confederate veteran, and she lied about her age, and no one knew how old she was when she died. But June Adamson wanted to take inspiration from those women reporters, and she did a thesis about them, and she interviewed the ones who were alive, including Nellie Kenyon. And I think Nellie was inspirational to her in a lot of ways. And that thesis there's only like maybe 2 copies that exist, and thankfully a friend got me one from the UT library because that thesis, along with her personal papers, gave me a good insight into, her thoughts on things. But there was another reporter at the Tennessean, Pat Welch. She took over for Nellie on the Federal beat after Nellie retired, and they kept in touch. And I don't know if she's still living. I tried to track her down. Probably not. It's been 50 years. But there were a few that took inspiration. And Keel Hunt, who went on to work for Governor Alexander and Senator Alexander. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you all very much.